Hello and welcome to episode 81 of Linux After Dark. I'm Joe.
I'm Chris.
I'm Gary.
And I'm Dalton.
Welcome back, chaps. Before we get started, I just wanted to mention OggCamp that we've just come back from, 3 of us at least. It was great to meet everyone, old and new, and thank you to people who came to my talk. Did anyone recognise you two then?
By voice, not by face for me. But yes, I had some interesting chats and I got to meet people I'd only ever met virtually, as it were, which was great. So it's really nice to do that and that it happened again after such a long time.
Yeah, similar for me. I had varying people recognise my voice. Many surprised that I wasn't a 40-year-old man, so that was good.
Well, you are a 40-year-old man at heart.
I'll take it.
So today we're going to revisit the topic of our home networking. Dalton, let's start with you because you've changed the most since we last talked about this.
Yeah, I think I've moved a lot of distance. So naturally that means tearing everything down and putting it back up again, which is my favorite thing to do, actually. I really love doing that. I was actually genuinely surprised at how easy it was to put everything back up, though. Tearing it down was the hard part. So when I got here to the apartment, I was able to get the new ISP stuff set up. They had already delivered it, which was really nice. And I just plugged in my router, which is still the MikroTik Hex S, and that thing I hope never dies, and I never have to get a new one because they're so much more expensive now than they were when I bought it. But it can do gigabit, and it'll just forward gigabit through, which is what I have now.
Symmetric gigabit, that's what you have now.
No, I would love if it was symmetric, but this is cable, so it's like 40 megabits up.
But still, 1,000 down.
Yeah. But what's the point if... I don't even know if you can send return packets fast enough for it to matter. So, once the router was plugged in, all the Ubiquiti stuff just started up again because it actually stores its configuration. And because I hadn't changed the external or internal IP setup, everything came back up. And it's like, wow, I love DHCP. It's amazing. We should use it more often.
So why are we talking about this then, if everything's just the same?
Because the real problem was that I had to get through the walls somehow to get wired Ethernet places. Because there's no Cat5 installed. Or actually there's Cat5 run to each of the phone jacks. Which is, I could do 100 megabit over that, but that's not quite good enough. And then there is coaxial cable run between everything, because of course there is. Charter was here. It's Spectrum now, but whatever.
And they want you to watch TV.
They really do. They really want to sell me TV. Actually, I haven't heard from them since buying the plan, which has actually been really nice. I think they're more excited to sell me a phone plan than anything. So I kind of researched. I knew that MoCa existed, but it's actually really cool. So I didn't have to change any of the wiring in the place. I just got 3 MoCa adapters, and one of them went in the closet where all the ISP stuff comes in. I detached the coaxial here from the ISP's network and just plugged in a MoCa adapter instead, and all the same splitters and stuff just worked, and I had gigabit to every point that I wanted it with those adapters.
So you really can push gigabit over coax then?
Isn't that weird? And
that is very weird.
I thought that it was something like Powerline, where it's half duplex, and it's really hard to find any information on how MoCa actually works. I think it's full duplex.
Really? So up and down at the same time, gigabit?
The way it works is I think there are 5 channels, and each channel is half duplex, and each one does about 500 megabit per second under perfect conditions. So you can be using 4 channels at the same time, I guess.
Huh.
2 of them up, 2 of them down. But it's really, really hard to find good information on how the heck any of this works.
Is it really expensive then?
It wasn't too bad. It was over $100 per adapter. So it's not great. But when you don't have any other options and, it's an apartment, it's a very noisy Wi-Fi environment, it's a much better way to get good performance than Wi-Fi itself.
Presumably, it's not just 2.4 that's noisy these days as well.
No, it's everything. 5 gigahertz, I can use the DFS channels for some reason, so I do that. I did find a quiet DFS channel, but that has its compatibility issues, so sometimes I have to move devices to 2.4 instead. So, yeah, terrible Wi-Fi performance from time to time.
It's funny because MoCa adapters are not as popular in the UK. And I think it's because British houses are not as cabled up, because cable TV here didn't really gain mainstream adoption until the 90s. And a lot of houses have not updated the cabling. So you just don't get the performance that you would get from a spectrumed up house or apartment.
So do you have just like plain old telephone copper?
Well, there's coaxial that is in bad shape, hasn't been upgraded. Sometimes the way that it's routed means that you get loads of leakage of the signal.
It's usually right next to a bunch of electrical cable and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's just the mileage here out of it, from what I've heard, is not great. I've never actually set it up myself. So if anyone's listening and they're saying, you're wrong, I've got it set up. But that's my understanding, that less people in the UK talk about it because it's less viable here.
And then I guess a lot of our phone cabling was either run by BT with like 4-core telephone cable, and people just ran their own homebrew extensions off the back of it. Like, it's not uncommon to walk into a house that was built in the 50s or 60s here and just have telephone extensions off of telephone extensions, to the point where it's almost impossible to find the telephone master socket in some older houses.
Yeah, and there's no shielding on that cable whatsoever.
Yeah, like zero shielding on it, and it's generally in like crap quality. Someone's painted over it with gloss about 5 times because it's run over people's skirting boards and all kinds of stuff like that. And it's not really until you get to newer houses where they've maybe considered running the copper phone line in Cat 5, or increasingly just there are no copper phone lines coming into the house at all.
To go into the technicalities of it, as I've been looking as we're speaking, it's also because of the bandwidth that's used in Europe and the UK compared to the US. So it was only 500 to 700 megahertz, whereas the spec in the US was anywhere from 50 to 1200. So MoCa 2X will work better in those higher frequencies, whereas our cabling is just not spec rated for the level that it needs to be, unfortunately. It's a shame because it's way better than Ethernet over power line. And if you've got really thick walls and you can't run actual Ethernet cable, it does seem like a sound option. But yeah, we just don't have the option.
The thing about Powerline is that it's hit and miss. It's either going to work really well or just be terrible or not work at all. There's not really an in-between, I found.
Yeah, I when I used to run my business, I wouldn't deploy it because I couldn't rely on it. And even if you set it up in a way where you thought it was reliable, that person would then plug something new in that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And suddenly you'd be getting phone calls saying, I'm getting dropouts. So, because your wife dries her hair every night now in a socket she didn't used to use because you've had an extension built, or they've played with the way that everything is junctioned together. So, you know, it's a hack and not a nice one.
Or in the US, you install one of those touch lamps and it gets triggered every so often by you sending too much data.
So you're getting a good backhaul, basically, from these MoCa adapters is what you're saying, and you've kept the wireless access points you had?
Yeah, there was no reason to upgrade. I mean, Wi-Fi 6E looks really cool, sounds really cool. The price does not look really cool.
So they're Ubiquiti access points like you had before?
Yeah, they're the AC lights. I think they still sell them even.
They do. They're getting really cheap. You can flash OpenWRT on them now as well.
I don't think I'll do that.
Well, that's what brings me to my angle on this conversation, because I have 2 access points next to one another at the moment, which sounds insane. But when we took up our fiber provider, they give you a Linksys Velop, which is not a great router. But the particular model I've got is a very good Wi-Fi access point, but it doesn't support VLANs. So I've got a Wi-Fi 6 access point for my main subnet, but then next to it is an Ubiquiti AC light for anything that I want to VLAN, like the guest Wi-Fi on 2.4 gigahertz or an IoT network, and my work Wi-Fi, because it still pushes close to my line speed. And I just want that little bit of protection to know that I'm fully VLANed off and there's a firewall that I can poke holes in for the things I'm working on, because I just like that extra level of security. But in an ideal world, I'd like to consolidate those 2 into one, or even those and the managed switch I have into one. And you can get OpenWRT devices. You can flash a router with OpenWRT and then configure it as a wireless access point, but it has 4 or 5 gigabit Ethernet ports. And some of them have 2.5 gigabit ports. For the WAN, you can just repurpose it. But it's the Wi-Fi drivers and just the general reliability of the Wi-Fi stack in open source. And I personally just haven't had as good an experience as just running the stock firmware, because they just black box it and make it work. And there's no disrespect to the OpenWRT developers, and a lot of MediaTek devices are getting quite good at Wi-Fi. But my historical experience is, because I work from home now, I cannot have anything but like super solid, never drop out Wi-Fi.
It's almost as if embedded development is really difficult, especially when the companies who make the devices want to keep as much of it as secret as possible.
It is, isn't it? And this is difficult because Qualcomm, for example, you'll see a lot of devices, including GLINet, which is a very popular brand. They'll advertise a travel router with OpenWRT, open source firmware, but it's not. They've taken the Qualcomm SDK to keep those juicy proprietary bits in. And so it's sort of running OpenWRT. And it's like if you go to the Arch Linux forums, but you're running Manjaro, and then you say, oh, I'm having a problem. And they're like, oh, can you post some logs? As soon as they see that you're running Manjaro, like, you're not running Arch. That's not Arch. And it's the same. So you can get an OpenWRT interface on these devices because there are bits of it in there, but you'll never get like a mainline version of OpenWRT that you can keep updating. You get the version you get with the device, and there's always disappointed people that pop up and say, oh, I'm browsing through the images. I can't find the 2302 version of OpenWRT. And people say that's because it's not real. It's a hacked together version of it. Because it is challenging to get the Wi-Fi to work. If that company sold that product with the fully vanilla OpenWRT image on it, they might have lots of customers coming back and saying it's unreliable. Whereas if they develop to an SDK level, they know that it's just going to work. And it's the same with the Ubiquiti devices. I mean, their firmware policy is flaky, but once I found one that was good, it just doesn't go down. I've just jinxed it now because I've said that. It's going to go completely wrong tomorrow. But
so do you just not do the updates then?
No, not for the AC Lite. I'm still on the last good known release of 5.14, especially because it's the work access point. The thing I dread more than anything is starting a day of working from home and the Wi-Fi starting to drop out where it didn't before. And that's another reason why I prefer to take these 2 access points and consolidate them into something new that has a fairly solid update track record. But I've not found that device yet.
I just have the auto updates on YOLO.
Yeah, likewise.
So you don't fancy the EAP 225s then that I've got?
I think if I got something like that, that's basically the equivalent to the AC Lite I've already got. So I would want to get a Wi-Fi 6. The problem with the Omada ones is they look like a flying saucer, some of them. They're like the size of a dinner plate. Like the AC Lite's big selling point. And also the Velop. The Velop is like one of those like stacked tower. So it's vertically standing and the Ethernet ports are in a vertical line. It's got a very small footprint. It's sort of like a larger can of beer or something. And then the AC Lite, you're meant to ceiling mount it, but I've just got it sat on the top of the TV cabinet. And yeah, it's very compact. But when I see some of the YouTube videos, they pick it up. It's like 3 times the size of the YouTuber's face. Like, this is not manageable.
Yeah, but once it's screwed to the ceiling, you're not going to notice, are you?
Yeah, possibly. But I think that's what I would be looking for, is either one of those tower beer can arranged ones or a compact ceiling mount design one, but that supports VLANs and is Wi-Fi 6 and has a solid update policy. And I'll probably buy something when I finally decide on it.
What about building an x86 box to do it?
Well, I've got that for my router, so that's fine. But what you have to realize with Wi-Fi on an x86 router, only certain cards, so it won't be built to be a router. The Wi-Fi that's on it will be a client chip, and not all Wi-Fi chips are broadcast AP Wi-Fi chips. So you have to put one in a PCIe slot. So there's a new wave of ARM routers that you can get on AliExpress now where they have a PCIe slot. So you just need to know which type of Wi-Fi card to buy and hook up. And I think those APU2s like Phelim's got, there's other devices like that that have a slot on. But yeah, you can't just buy like an Intel Wi-Fi card on eBay that you would for your laptop, put it in, and then put it in client mode. It doesn't work. It has to be a specific model for that. And I also do like the idea of segregating the boxes so that I can have this conversation now and say, you know, the Wise 5070, our venerable veteran, is my router and is way, way more powerful than I'm going to need, even if I doubled my internet speed. But I'd like to be able to chop and change the Wi-Fi and the managed switch that accompany it.
On today's episode of Chris Looks for a Unicorn.
Yep.
Yes, exactly. And so I've got 2 access points. Hey, look, it works. So that's the other thing. I don't know if you've ever been in a house where the Wi-Fi is flaky and you've got 2 people working from home, but it is a very, very uncomfortable situation for your marriage and your mental health.
You know, actually, the hardest part of getting the network set up again here was Apple Home. I have no idea what was wrong with it, but I had to delete everything and start again with Apple Home.
Mm.
Oh, I've had to do that, even with not moving house. I've just had devices that just decide, yeah, I'm not going to connect to the network anymore.
What's Apple Home?
It's home automation stuff. I have a few switches and things that work over Thread, and they all came back up, but I couldn't change the location of the home. And because I couldn't change the location of the home, a bunch of other stuff in like messages and stuff didn't work because it's all integrated. So I had to delete the home and start it again.
So Thread, you mentioned there, I've heard of that a bit, but explain a bit more. What is that?
Thread is another networking standard. So you've got like Zigbee and the other one, Z-Wave, Z-Wave, I don't know what you want to call it. Thread is another wireless network for home automation devices, and it's supposed to be more reliable and stuff. I don't know. The important big thing is that they all use the Matter standard, which allows you to connect them to a bunch of different home automation platforms, and the control is then local, and there's a standard for how they all communicate with each other. Thread is just one option. It's a mesh networking standard, so anything that is hardwired into the wall also serves as a repeater for everything else. So the more Thread devices you have that are hardwired, the further your network reaches.
And are you able to use that if your internet goes down?
Yes, that is the really nice part of Apple Home, is that if the internet is down and I can convince my phone to connect to the Wi-Fi even though internet is down, which is kind of the hard part sometimes, as anyone who's used Android or iOS in the past 5 years knows, yeah, I can still control my home using the phone.
Because that is the constant burden. I was having a discussion with a colleague about it. He was looking into smart heating, and so many of the devices we were looking at, they needed a constant cloud connection, and we would dig into forums, and that would be the main complaint. My internet went down and I had trouble turning my heating on via the entire setup and things like that. So that's a big positive, I think.
That's why I've got dumb stats that I have to program manually.
Ah, right. The single point of failure for all of this is the Apple TV. So Apple TVs and HomePods serve as Thread router nodes, and also bridge your Apple Home stuff to iCloud so that you can actually use it from outside of the house. So if that goes down, then nothing works.
So you've now got a redundant Apple TV set up, right? Just to make sure.
No. But when I got here, I didn't have the TV or anything set up yet, so I just plugged the Apple TV into a wall, and people looked at me funny while they were moving stuff in.
Yeah. What's that for? Watching TV? Oh, there is no TV. Hang on. What's going on?
You really are all in on Apple these days then.
I wouldn't call it all in. I think it's a decent enough home automation thing, but there are a lot of times where I'd go over to the plug and push the button on it too.
Here's a question for you, right? So there's Thread and there's Matter, but could you choose to not use iCloud and all of that stuff would work through something like Home Assistant?
I haven't tried. I have no idea if that works.
That's always the other thing that worries me. Probably not with Apple, but with other things. If there's no way out of the manufacturer's system and then suddenly the manufacturers sending, as has become common now, you get an email a couple of years after spending 40 quid a pop on like TRVs with smart capability. And they say, unfortunately, due to business difficulties, the back end is shutting down in 6 weeks. And people scrabble around like they did with the Stadia controller to try and work out a way to flash it. And then maybe Google will, in that case, relent and opened a window for that. But you end up with like £40 a radiator bricked, useless thermostats. That's the big worry with these things.
I specifically bought things for HomeKit, so I don't know what their support outside of that is. Most of them, I think, do like Samsung smart things, but then you're doing Samsung smart things.
Yeah, and that sounds even worse somehow than the Apple stuff.
Right, well, we'd better wrap it up, but do let Chris know what he should do. Find him his unicorn. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Chris.
I've been Gary.
Show at linuxafterdark.net.
See you later.